Hello everybody, my name is Walter and this is episode 42 of my Redstone Commands Series. In this episode I want to cover the particle command, which can be used to give your world a bit of an ambience or maybe have a bit of a flair for your data pack. But what are particles? Well, simply put, they are short-lived graphical effects that are created when certain events occur or you are in a certain environment. For example, ash filling the air or something exploding, rain falling, shriekers getting activated, and so on and so on. And all of those can be artificially created using the particle command. Now, this command comes in two versions, a basic version and a more extended version. The basic version will create one particle at a given position. The extended version gives you a bit more parameters to play with. The basic version starts with the name of the command particle. Then you specify which particle you want to create. Depending on the particle, you may have to add more parameters at this point. I will come to those later. And then, somewhat optional, the position where the particle is to be created. If not given, then it will default to wherever the command executes. That's the basic version. The extended version starts the same way. Particle, then name of the command with potentially additional parameters, then the position, which is not any longer optional. Then we have delta. This defines a cuboid area around the position within which the particle or particles are randomly placed. The numbers you give here are multiplied with 8 for the total size, also the total width, height, and depth of that cuboid area. Then we have speed, which gives the particles a randomized velocity, so they will flitter around a bit. And then we have, following that, count, which defines how many particles are to be created. This can be between 0 and 21 billion, roughly. Special case here is 0, which will, instead of creating nothing, will create one particle, and then delta and speed work slightly different. I will come to the exceptions a bit later. After that, you have optionally the option to define how far away you want to be able to see those particles. The default value is normal and is 32 meters. And if you use force, you can see that parameter or this particle from 512 meters apart. And the final optional parameter is viewers. This specifies which players are actually allowed to see this particle. So you can make a haunted item which only shows the player who is holding it a certain animation, or you can just give that animation to the winner of a game or similar. And with that, it's time for some examples. So let's start with the basic syntax here. First, the simple version here, just creating a cloud slightly above the lever here. And that's it. 20 times a second, since this is a repeating command block. Now for the extended version. First, let's have a look at the delta, 111, which would equal an area 8 by 8 by 8. And what you can also see here, there is not a even distribution over that area. The particles tend to be closer to the center, so there is a bit of a Gaussian distribution going on here. Next, let's have a look at the speed. So a smaller area, speed is 1. And you can see those clouds particles are created at random positions and flitting around quite fast. Then we have count, now set to 10. And you can see this cloud here is much, much denser than what we had before. And then finally we have force and viewers. So I'm forcing this, and we'll see the effect in a moment. And I'm filtering the viewers for players that actually hold a stick in their hand. So I activate this and I don't see anything until I hold a stick. If I don't hold a stick, those time out. And the moment I get a stick again, those get timed in again. And now for the force view, if I get further away, you will see those time out and not being created anymore, but those are created since I can see them up to 512 blocks apart. So those were the basic syntax. Now let's talk about the examples, or the exceptions to be more precise. Let's start with the special particles that need additional parameters. So we have three that need additionally the definition of a block, which can also contain block data. For example, if you have redstone lamp, you can have a lit redstone lamp, for example. Those are the block, which is essentially the mining animation particle. Then we have the block marker, which gives you the front face of that block. Could be quite useful for displays. And then we have the falling dust, which essentially uses the color of that block, and otherwise it's just some dust falling down, as the name implies. Then we have dust, which needs an RGB color, so red, green, and blue. Those are numbers between 1 and 0. And then additionally a size. So here I'm going with 1 red, 1 green, and 1 or half blue, which is a bit of a somewhat golden or dirty green color. Size is 1. Now let's say we make the size to 10, and we don't want any red in our color. You can see now it's just some blue-green and a very big blob. Then we have dust color transition. Starts the same. We have a color and then a size, and then we have a second color. This is the starting color, and this is the end color. So I'm starting at red, and I'm going to green. And as you can see, if I do this, I start with red, and then it will transition into this kind of autumn-themed pattern and will end or pattern out in green. Then we have item, which is very similar to block. Essentially, you could say mining animation using an item. Here you have to give it an item, which can also contain MBT data, although this doesn't really have any effect on the display. So this would be what you get when you try to mine a diamond sword. Then we have Skulk Charge, which is this little animation here. Here you give it an angle in radians. So 0 would be straight up, and 1 pi is essentially straight down, as an example. Then we have the shriek, where you give it actually an delay in game ticks. So 60 game ticks is 3 seconds. And you can see nothing seems to happen, but about 3 seconds later, I get the shriek going on. Then we have vibration, where you give it a target destination. Unfortunately, you can't use relative coordinates here. Those need to be absolute coordinates. And then a time or duration it has to get to that position. So in this case, it goes to the origin of the world and has 10 seconds for that. So essentially the distance plus this time defines how fast this goes. And those were the special names. Now for the special counts, or to be more precise, count equals 0. So what happens then is you will create one particle, but the delta and the speed get new meaning. The delta no longer is a cuboid area, but it defines instead a velocity, and the speed defines a multiplier to that velocity. So again, usually between plus and 0 is 1, and the velocity can be a very big number. So for example, let's go with 10. And here I'm essentially going in the negative x direction, and the overall velocity is 10, and you can see this goes quite fast. Let's reduce the velocity just by making this 1. And now I have a somewhat slower cloud thrower. So that's essentially what happens when you have count equals 0. Now there are two exceptions depending on the particle itself. If the particle is ambient entity effect or entity effect, then the delta gets interpreted as a color, again red, green, blue, and the speed is the higher, the dimmer the color becomes. So here I'm just going with straight red, and I'm going with 200, and you can see it's a very, very dark red. If I, let's say, go to just 2, now it's a very bright red. Interesting enough, if you go to 0, it's black. The same if you go to, let's say, 500, it's also black. So there is a certain range you can work with. And the higher the number, the dimmer the color, or the darker the color. The ambient effect works the same way, it's just a bit more transparent. And then we have node. Here, the delta, or the first number of the delta, actually gets interpreted as the color for that node. There is a table in the wiki where you can see that, but for example, 0.5 is this green color here. Interesting enough, which is not really in the wiki currently, if you set the speed to something above 0, it appears to also include some other colors, so you get some randomization going on. And with that covered, we have finally reached the end of this episode about the particles command. I hope you enjoyed it, and well, see ya.